The whole idea of vineyard to describe relationship of God to people, of people to God, is very old. It begins in the Old Testament. It's a well-established metaphor for the relationship of people to God. The next thing is this: an essential part of the Christian life is that we bear fruit. We have to share life by definition of being a Christian and being people of the way and belonging to the communion of Father, Son, and Spirit. And belonging, staying connected to the divine, is the way we will bear fruit, which will glorify the Father. Now, that means we share, actually, by virtue of being created in God's image, we share in the divine life of Father, Son, and Spirit. We belong to that sharing in an essential way. So that's what I want you to think of with this word that I highlighted in yellow, remain. 8 times that word is used by John in this pericope. There's a reason for that. What is the connection between those words remain and the words of bearing fruit? You do bear fruit if you're conscious of your connection into the divine life. Why? Because in that mutual indwelling that we belong to, in this Father, Son, and Spirit dynamic of love that we are invited to and connected to, there exists in that what we've come to call in later theology the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, benignity, good, all of those 12, what we call fruits of the Spirit, as well as gifts of the Spirit. They belong to our connection. They're in us because of our belonging. Now, why is that important? It's important because that creates an outreach of activity, a sharing of divine life, multiplying the experience of mutuality in the people that we meet. Because nothing of God stays locked in. And therefore, nothing of us who claim that belonging to God should remain protected, defended, locked in. So there's this divine dynamic of realizing the belonging, and it's like an exhalation. And all of this goodness goes out and spreads. So remaining is connected to the bearing fruit. So in all of those times, 5 times we're told to bear fruit, 8 times we're told to remain in Jesus. Now think about what's going on when John is writing this. The Christians are living at the end of the 1st century, and they're going to be persecuted. They are in fact being persecuted, right? John is trying to be a Barnabas, to encourage them, to lift them up, to uphold them, reminding them that belonging to the divine indwelling that this is means that you are not exempt from what Jesus Christ himself suffered and said. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. If a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, then it will bear much fruit. Don't think you are exempt from that if you belong to that mutual indwelling. So John is trying to encourage them, especially to encourage them that if you're given a choice, like deny that so that you won't be thrown to the lions. He's saying, please believe me that it's more important to remain connected, to admit it, and to hang on to that. That's what will last. Death will never be the end. So that whole thing is going on in this. John is directly addressing the people that of the end of the 1st century who are in fact being persecuted. So that's the first thing I want to tell you. And then after that, the takeaway. You get a sense of who you are by the groups you belong to. I think we try to tell this to young kids all the time, and even to young adults, right? Who are your friends? Who do you hang with? It matters. You can become better, more conscious, more confident, depending on who you connect with, or less confident and more of a follower a person who doesn't think critically and just kind of goes along with somebody else making the decisions. It's very important. It's just as true for us as adults. Who do we hang with? Am I a better person because of that connection? We get a sense of who we are and what we are about from the groups we belong to. Now, here then is a paradox of Jesus' life. Everything Jesus did was about being inclusive with everybody. People that good Jews would disdain. Lepers, tax collectors, people in a different social class, people who were rendered unclean by any number of reasons, for any number of reasons. Jesus, those taboos didn't count for him because everything in him and about him and from him was communion. And yet, here's the paradox. The paradox is that very inclusive way of Jesus' life provoked all sorts of divisions. And I think we have the repercussions of that to this day when we miss the reality of inclusive communion and focus instead on what separates us. Certainly Paul straddled that. He was a good Pharisee who would himself personally make sure everybody who didn't follow the rules, Jewish 613 precepts, the way a good Jew should, would be in fact punished. And then he had this amazing experience of the resurrected life of Jesus, and he completely turned. He straddled both of those, the righteous man, and then the person who offered himself to die, really, because he would not deny or disconnect with that primal experience of the risen Jesus. So it's an interesting paradox. I've always thought it's a fine line to straddle, isn't it? The knowing who you are and loving who you are and the groups you belong to in a way that's open and not, restricted.